I'm Ernie Humphrey, Educational Programs Leader for Performative, the largest online community for corporate finance, accounting, treasury, and related professionals. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, The 5 Keys to Delivering Better Forecasts Faster. A car travels where you steer it. A business is no different. Rapid and accurate forecasting allows your car to quickly envision the future and act to drive results. In too many companies, forecasting is a rote exercise that adds time and effort but not results. Rapid and accurate forecasting allows the company to quickly envision a future and act to drive results. Today you'll discover how to define a good forecast at your company in terms of duration, accuracy, and other key variables, and our speakers will share actionable advice regarding how to deliver strategic value from the forecasting efforts at your company. I'd like to thank Anaplan, whose commitment to thought leadership helps us make this webinar possible and delivered at no cost. A quick note on today's agenda. First, we'll experience a joint presentation for our featured speakers. Then I'll move to the interactive Q&A session where we'll spend the remainder of our hour. We would like this to be an interactive experience for you. So if you have any questions at any time, please go to the questions area in your GoToWebinar control panel and send us your questions. We can't promise to get all of them in, but we'll do our best and we'll follow up afterwards with any questions we did not get to today. A few logistical notes about the webinar. Links to today's presentation and video recording will be sent out to all attendees in 24 hours of the event. Those who would like CPE credits need to answer all polling questions during the event and should have pre-registered for CPE credit. For any questions on CPE credit, please send an email to cpe@performative.com. For those who qualify for CPE credit, the certificate will be emailed to you within 24 to 48 hours. Again, we encourage you to ask questions on today's topic via the questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel anytime during the webinar. Finally, if you have to take a short survey today regarding the webinar, immediately following the webinar, we greatly appreciate your feedback regarding our event today, as we always strive to improve the ROI we offer our event attendees for their valuable time. A quick word about Performative. Performative is the largest online community and resource for senior-level corporate finance, accounting, treasury, and related leaders. Performative connects corporate finance leaders to provide instant advice and insights on the tough financial and strategic challenges they face every day. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Steve Player. Steve Player serves as North America Program Director for the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable, BBRT, and works with BBRT member companies to implement continuous planning processes. He has over 30 years' experience with improving performance management and implementing strategic planning processes. He is also Managing Director of Beyond EPS Advisors, a consulting firm, and founder of ABM Smart. He is the co-author of Future Ready, How to Master Business Forecasting and Beyond Performance Management, as well as 5 other books. He writes the Finance Transformation column for Business Finance magazine, featuring CFO interviews from leading organizations on innovative finance and planning processes. With that, it is my distinct pleasure to hand the floor over to Steve Player. Steve, the floor is yours. Please take it away. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ernie. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the crowd today, and thanks so many of you for joining us. Hopefully, we'll have an interactive hour here and some good discussion. Let me move forward with the agenda. Ernie's kind of got us started with the introductions and learning objectives. In a minute, we're going to talk about 5 symptoms of forecasting illness, because oftentimes a lot of people will start forecasting and they'll be frustrated because they're not getting the right results. So we'll start talking about some things that we commonly run into. And then Serena Software will come and talk about their specific application of some of these principles and how they've driven that forward as kind of a real live example of what we're trying to do. And then I'll come back and kind of give you a recap of the 5 keys to better forecasting to really help you remember and take them back to your organization, so kind of the key takeaways we can walk away with this. Before I do that, I want to talk just real briefly about the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable that Ernie mentioned. That's the organization that I run that helps companies like yourself move to better planning and control. Our mission is through a collaborative research model where members basically join the roundtable and fund research, allowing us to go out and document some of the best practices in the world. And what we're able to bring is truly innovative companies that have done an excellent job of using rolling forecasts as one of a technique to further plan, do a better job of planning and controlling their organization. And that's basically our membership model. There'll be more on that at the end of the presentation. We've got several companies that are already on similar journeys and having some extremely dramatic results. Companies like Statoil that have eliminated budgets and have moved to a much more proactive way of managing and moving forward. Many of those in North America, many in Europe, Asia, and around the world. So those are some of the people on similar journeys. So if you're just getting started, you're moving into some pretty good company. Now, you may have been reading a lot of the news articles about rolling forecasts, and it seems to be quite prevalent. The real kickoff for that movement I credit with Russ Bannon's May 2011 article, which is the upper left-hand corner there, Let It Roll, Why More Companies Are Abandoning Budgets in Favor of Rolling Forecasts. Prior to that article coming out, we've been working for over a decade articulating better ways to plan and control. But really the downfall of 2008 when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt and the world seemed to go into a heavy tailspin, and the financial crisis of 2009 was on us, that really many people either didn't finish their budget, or if they didn't pay much attention to it, because all of a sudden the environment we were operating in was a much, much different world. And many of those people began to move and look for better ways to control and better ways to forecast to see what was coming at them. And Russ's article did a good job of examining that and articulating what many companies were starting to do. That article became the most viewed, most popular article for CFO Magazine for all of 2011. It was followed up by another story Russ wrote called Freed from the Budget, that featured several of our Beyond Budgeting members talking about how they manage their organization completely without budgets. And that's the middle cover there. That's the September 2012 cover story. It also was the most viewed, the most popular article for CFO Magazine for the year 2012. So those have unleashed a floodgate of articles and discussion and much of the debate that hopefully your company is involved with. Our most recent article was in Journal of Accountancy, the October 2013 issue. It's got a cover story on Beyond Budgeting featuring some implementation work of a casino up in Washington State. And it just really shows the trend that everybody at all levels are really interested in this. I mentioned Statoil and American Express and Unilever and some of the big companies doing this. I also want to emphasize we've got a lot of small companies doing this. So if you're a small to mid-sized company, we go as low as a $10 million public relations firm. We've got a financial credit union that only has $100 million in assets, which if you're in the banking, you know that's a fairly small business. These tools and techniques are applicable for everybody. So take a look at some of the articles that are out there. Let me jump into some of the content I wanted to really share with you today. Really focuses on a lot of confusion with really the aims and purposes of good forecast. In many cases, a lot of people think forecast is trying to reach a target or trying to hit a number, and they get confused as to really what is a forecast. If you really think about it, a forecast is a projection or a understanding of where you think you're headed. If you really think about it, we don't want to confuse that with a target, and a target is really where we want to go. If you're steering a ship or steering a plane, in many cases, you've got to constantly make course corrections and adjustments to bring yourself back on target. And in many cases, you've got to constantly be adjusting. And understanding where you're actually headed versus where you want to go is real important to avoid that schizophrenia. The other thing comes in is when they're questioning people about forecasting, oftentimes that by the way they approach the process will create a tremendous amount of schizophrenia. Now, if you think about schizophrenia as a medical term, it means that basically we put the mind in a double bind. So let me illustrate that with a discussion on forecasting. Have you ever in your career had a situation where your boss came and said, I want to get a good forecast of your division. I want you to tell me what you think, what's your best guess of what your organization is going to do in terms of revenue and net income? And so you think about that and you give him your best guess, what you honestly think. To which he immediately replies, oh, I can't believe you give me a number that no. How can we possibly reach our numbers? You know, that number's not good enough. You need to get up there at least be twice that much. Well, at that point that happens, that's a schizophrenic situation coming in. Because now has the respondent to that question, now all of a sudden your mind's in a double bind because you really have to choose. Do I answer the question he first asked, which is give me a realistic estimate, or do I try to interpret the second question that I got berated about by not giving a number that is high enough? So throughout history, now every time I get asked a question, I'm going to cringe and not be able to respond simply because I don't know which question he's asking. And so that's a lot of the fear that goes into the forecasting process. One of the reasons it gets into a lot of sandbagging and a lot of guessing and a lack of transparency, which destroys all the things forecasting are trying to do. Second symptom is really single-point tunnel vision, which is an unhealthy obsession with a particular number. And in most cases, that number is achieving the budget number. In many cases, organizations waste weeks and months putting together annual numbers and negotiating back and forth and up and down and going back and forth. You probably know the drill. The field was asked to submit a bunch of information, which it did, and it sent it up. And corporate said, that's not good enough. You need to rework it. So the field reworked and sent it again. And corporate said, you're getting closer, but that's not quite good enough. Third time, the field says, why don't you just tell me what the number is? I get tired of guessing. And the corporate says, I can't tell you what the number is. It needs to be your number. To which the field looks up and says, it quit being my number 3 times ago, it's your number now. So we get these kind of obsessions on numbers, and when you think about numbers, particularly budget numbers, they're really based on a bunch of assumptions that turn out to be wrong. So whether a number is a good number or a bad number, in many cases, not due to your performance, but it's due to actually what happened in the environment. So in many cases, a single point obsession gets everybody honed in on a number and eludes the real power that forecasting has in helping us see kind of what's happening around us. Symptom number 3 that we want to deal with is really dealing with the whole thing of delusions of accuracy. And delusions of accuracy is often the belief that if I just get more and more data in there, if I get more and more information in there, then I'll be able to perfectly predict what the future is. And so a lot of people want, because they've got greater computing power, they want to jam the chart of account level into the forecast. And the problem with that is all that more and more detail does is do 2 things for you. It gives you more work to do, and it gives you more places to be wrong. In fact, what we find is there's an inverse relationship. The more you focus on the key things, or as Stephen Covey would often say, the focus on the big rocks, the more you have a chance of getting it close to where it should be. The more detail you jam in there, the more time you turn your financial planning and analysis person into a data monkey, because they'll spend 80 or 90% of the time trying to gather information and very, very little time analyzing and understanding. So this delusion of accuracy is a big problem that we often see in terms of what's out there. System 4, nervous system breakdown. We basically shove more and more things into the system. The misguided attempt that's going to help us, and we want to try to analyze and look at the detail and obsess over forecasts. The more and more we track and the more math we use, and literally we get a situation where we're just choked to death. We've got way too much happening to us, and we freeze up. Symptom number 5 that we see out there is really visual impairment. And that's really the failure to provide enough forward visibility to discern trends. In many cases, when I talk to audiences, and I literally go around the world doing this, and I'll ask the question of how many people forecast, and a lot of hands go up. And then I ask the follow-up question, how far? And most of the time the answer is it depends, to which I say depends on what? And it usually depends on where we are during the year. So if I'm 3 months into the year, I'm forecasting 9 months. And if I'm 6 months into the year, I'm forecasting 6 months. And then if I'm 9 months into the year, I'm only forecasting 3 months. And that's a practice that we call forecasting to the wall, with the wall being the year-end number. And that year-end number is often the negotiated budget target that you're trying to get to, or the performance bonus number you're trying to reach. And literally, a lot of forecasting is merely trying to validate what's happening there. The analogy I like to use is the same as if you bought a brand new car, and the first night you got in your new car to drive it, a very funny thing happened. You turn the lights on, and the light's only showing out 1,500 feet. And as they go out 1,500 feet and you start to move forward, now all of a sudden the funny thing's happening with the lights. They only show 1,200 feet, 1,000 feet, 800, 600, 400, and at 200 feet, almost at the point of total darkness, they pop out another 1,500 feet. I think most of us agree we wouldn't want to ride in a car that had that kind of poor visibility or diminishing light coming at us and only popped out at intervals when we were almost totally blind. Yet many organizations run a forecasting system that's exactly the same. It has that exact same kind of visibility where you're going almost to the point of darkness before it pops out again. And the problem with that is not only is you have the diminishing visibility, but you've also got some impairment in terms of what's out there. You've also got an impairment in that people won't tell you the truth. And I'll hold that and talk about that in symptom number 7. In symptom number 6, what we really want to focus on there is a lack of coordination. And this is the type of situation when organizations will have not a forecast, but everybody will have their forecast. And everybody, there'll be a proliferation of forecasts out there. So again, it's impossible. It gives almost a blurred vision because you've got so many different versions of the truth out there. Sales thinks we ought to do this, and operations doesn't believe them, so they've adjusted that number, and they think we're going to do this. Finance doesn't trust either one of them, so finance has its own version. And literally, everybody has their own forecast of their own version of truth, and nobody has the ability to talk about anything because they're all speaking different languages, working from different numbers. So you got to have kind of one version of truth, one set of forecasts that we all work off of. We need to understand why it might vary, but we've got to have one set of numbers that we're working off of. And the final symptom I want to talk about is really sociopathic behavior patterns, the unwitting encouragement of behavior patterns that are damning to the forecast process and the health of the organization as a whole. You know, we talked about some of these things, and some of these symptoms become cumulative in terms of what's out there. When people in the line organizations, because they've been put in the semantic schizophrenia, and that they're torn, they become frozen and impossible to answer questions, or they're trying to guess. When you have this unhealthy obsession on the number, everybody focuses on the year-end number, and we negotiate in the middle of the previous summer what the number should be, and then everything about forecasting becomes hitting the number. In the meantime, we're oblivious to all the things that are happening around us, all the threats that have popped up, all the opportunities that are passing us by that we're not taking advantage of. And Livy, we have a situation where we've encouraged behavior patterns because we rewarded the people that hit forecast accuracy. And this is on final myth I'll talk about in terms of forecast accuracy, because it's a term that's really bandied around a lot. But the whole problem of forecast accuracy is the only way to really ensure forecast accuracy in an uncertain world is by giving the low ball estimate. If you thought you could grow your business 4 to 12% in the coming year, the only thing you could guarantee that you could always hit would be the low end of the number. So hence everybody forecasting, instead of trying to hit the midpoint or trying to hit a reasonable number in between, or understanding that the forecast is in a range, instead they're giving the low ball number. So everything, instead of understanding where we truly think we're headed, is all about managing expectations and all about shaving people's perceptions of how you're going to be. And if you have any of these symptoms of forecasting illness, you got to be careful, because forecasting needs to be rehabilitated, re-engineered, and revamped. Otherwise, you're doing the mechanics but not getting the results that you really need. Now, the good news is we've got some ways to help that, and we're going to share some of them with you here in the seminar. If you need to go deeper, I encourage you to take a look at our book, Future Ready, How to Master Business Forecasting. Future Ready is really out there, and it will take you through some of the key things to work with and everything in terms of how to tackle that, how to look at time, how to look at models, measurement, risk, and forecasting. In a nutshell, what Future Ready will help you do is really jump in and really begin to think about the whole process of really what is a forecast and what are you trying to do. And what we learned is really, it's important first and foremost to remember the key concepts. A target is what you would like to have happen. Okay, it's where you want to go as an organization. And you do that based on, you do it based on a set of plans that you produce of what you think is going to happen. The forecast, we look at those plans and project what we think the result will be. In many cases, the organization is currently not trending there, so we've got to separate those two things in terms of what we're trying to do and in terms of where they try to go. It's all based on these plans of how we're going to try to reach it. Now, if I want to think about the specifications for a good forecast, I have a series of 5 things I want to look for. I want them to be timely, actionable, reliable, aligned, and cost-effective. If I turn that into a mnemonic, TARAC really doesn't spell anything. But if I flip that around the other way and turn TARAC into carat, carat's the measure of a fine gemstone, so we really call these the 5 attributes of diamond-level forecasting. So remember, what we're going to try to go to is we want our forecast to be timely, actionable, reliable, aligned, and cost-effective. But then Serena's software is going to come up and take you through how they applied these 5 things in their approach.
As I introduce our final speaker, Melissa McFarland. Melissa McFarland is Director of Accounting at Serena Software, where she manages audit, accounting, and accounts receivable. She and her team use Anaplan for P&L, forecast maintenance, revenue, and annual budget and process. Prior to Serena, Melissa was Senior Accountant at Synopsys. She holds a degree in accounting from Oregon State University. With that, it is my distinct pleasure to hand the floor over to Melissa McFarland. Melissa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. This is Nathan. Welcome, everybody. Let's start off by telling you just a little bit about Serena. Serena, there we go. Our vision as a company is to help organizations orchestrate their application development and delivery process and business processes. We are selling primarily to enterprise software, primarily to large IT shops. We've been around for over 30 years as a company, publicly owned for a while and privately owned. And what we were finding was that our financial planning analysis processes at Serena had enormous complexities. We would have, we had annual planning processes, revenue forecasting processes, all done out of Excel with numerous people, as Steve was describing, sort of with their own models in different parts of the company. It was all in Excel. There was always a lack. There were always doubts about the data because different people had different data sources. There just a lot of different folks doing different things and not very well coordinated in various departments across the company. So then a few years ago, we set about trying to figure out how we might coordinate this a little better. Working with Anaplan, we were able to develop several models using the Anaplan platform that have brought much of this complexity into a much simpler cloud-based model. We are able to forecast the vast majority of our revenue streams and recurring contracts. We're able to forecast that with an amazing amount of accuracy based on actual data. And also incorporating the software revenue recognition rules that are one of the primary drivers. And we have people all across the world contributing to this and utilizing this, and has led to much better forecasting processes for us, and the ability to communicate and spend more time actually analyzing the data and having real conversations about what we can, what actions we can take as a company, as opposed to what we used to do, which was spending time just building Excel spreadsheets and sending them back and forth.
And so picking up where Nathan left off and actually looking back for a moment at the previous slide here, there were really 4 key components to our planning and forecasting processes. One, of course, was the creation of our annual plans and the related budgets from that. So, you know, back to Steve's earlier point, those were really our targets for the year, the things upon which, you know, performance-based compensation and corporate targets were set. Then we had our revenue forecast, and the primary component of that was really our maintenance revenue. So as Nathan mentioned, Serena's been in business for over 30 years, and so we also sell primarily perpetual software licenses. So we have a very large base of maintenance-paying customers, and an extremely large percentage of our annual revenues come from those annual maintenance renewals, which are recognized ratably. And so that revenue forecast has quite a bit of complexity to it because there are inputs coming from multiple places. We have the contracts that are eligible for renewal and, you know, the assumptions around those. We have the contracts that are already banked and the revenue amortization associated with those. And then we have the attach from new maintenance on new license sales. Then we have our P&L forecast, which is the more short-term view that, you know, what we think will really happen. And so we're constantly rolling that on a monthly basis and looking forward to, you know, what's been happening with our actuals so far year to date and what we think is going to be happening in the future. And, you know, comparing that to our annual plans and figuring out where the gaps are and using that data to, you know, to try to figure out how we can adjust certain aspects of our business to improve our ability to reach those annual targets that we're striving for. And so the things that were really preventing us from being able to do those things that we want to do were the manual nature of our processes and tools, basically, you know, being entirely in Excel, and then the complexity of our organization and just the difficulty of coordinating those people around the world in all these different functions and keeping them really aligned with and aware of and giving them visibility into, you know, the forecast data and the targets and how they were performing toward those. And so that's where Anaplan came into the picture for us. And so we started with the maintenance revenue forecast. That was the first model that we built. So I mentioned the multiple forecast drivers. The contracts eligible for renewal have a whole host of assumptions around them. Renewal rates, which can be unique per product and per region, and some complex rules around the, you know, recognition of those contracts and what happens when, you know, contracts lapse and so forth. So we used to do this process in Excel, and it would take me 3 to 4 days to update it each time I did. And so as a result of the difficulty of doing so, I would only update that forecast once per quarter, and I would only do it for the Americas, which is our largest region, completely ignoring the remainder of our business throughout the world. Once we moved it into Anaplan, we were able to take that update process from 3 to 4 days to about 30 minutes. And as a result, we were able to move our updates of this forecast from quarterly to monthly and bring our entire worldwide data into that forecast. So a huge improvement for us there in terms of efficiency. So once we had the revenue forecast built and integrated into our regular, periodic processes, we tackled the P&L forecast next. We have contributors around the world to this forecast. We're looking at, both headcount expenses, which are key to our business, being a software company, as well as the discretionary items. And, we're concerned with bringing actuals into the forecast as we close each period, and, looking at whether, the directions that we think that we're trending in are, supported by the actual results. And then we're also interested, of course, in comparing that forecast of where we think we're going to what our plan is for the year. And again, previously this was all in Excel, a huge conglomeration of spreadsheets that were linked to one another. And when we would seek input from people around the world, links would be broken, formulas would be changed, things wouldn't roll up properly. And as a result, the process really wasn't effective. So we brought it into Anaplan, and we took that process of preparing that forecast from hours to minutes and allowed ourselves to really begin analyzing the information that we were getting from the forecast versus simply collecting data and worrying about the logistics of how it was rolling up into our spreadsheets. So the next process that we tackled in Anaplan was our annual operating plan. So, again, this was previously entirely Excel-based. So bringing it into Anaplan allowed us to build far more sophisticated analysis around headcount expenses, allowed us to plan for the timing of new hires and analyze costs associated with that. Again, by automating this within Anaplan, building a model, taking it out of Excel, and eliminating those manual steps, we took our process from 60 hours simply to prep all of the spreadsheets to start on the plan to only 2 hours, and even more importantly, created a single source of truth for what the targets were, what the budget was for all of our departments. We no longer had to worry that someone would pull up some old version of a spreadsheet and say, well, I was working to this budget because this is what I thought I had, and now you're changing the numbers on me. Everyone knows now that there's a single source of truth. And then once we had that, we were able to create variance reporting, give our business users better visibility into budget to actual and forecast to actual, which has really improved their accountability and visibility. And as a result, there's a lot more, as a result of that transparency, there's a lot more trust between finance and the business about what the numbers are, great reduction in the errors that used to occur in our budgeting and forecasting process, and we're just far more efficient overall in the entire cycle of forecasting within our company. So I wanted to show a couple of snapshots here of some of the graphs that we have within our maintenance revenue forecasting model to give you guys a picture of the sort of data that we're able to see now that we've built the model in Anaplan. So this first graph that we're looking at here is a roll-up of the total revenue expected for Product A in North America. Now with a few clicks on little drop-downs at the top of this graph within the model, I can look at any individual product, or I can look at all products as a whole. I can look at the North America region or any other region or all of them together. And I can see my different revenue sources by month. What portion of my revenue each month is coming from new bookings, what's coming from contracts eligible for renewal, what's already in the bank from previously booked contracts, and then what the total revenue recognition is. So it really gives us a nice picture of that breakdown. and allows us to look at the trends in products over time. Are we seeing that the revenue for a particular product line or a particular region is increasing or decreasing over time, and which category is it occurring in? And as one more example here, another graph from our dashboard is a breakdown of the total revenue, in this case in the North America region, from various products here. So again, looking at these sorts of graphs over time help us to see, which products are most important to meeting our forecast, which ones are really showing declines over time, and where we might want to do a little more research to understand why we're losing ground in a particular product area and experiencing higher cancellation rates. So we wanted to wrap up here by talking a bit about some of the key things that we learned in the process of really re-examining our FP&A processes at Serena and bringing in Anaplan.
Yeah, so sort of bringing that home. I mean, obviously a lot of these we've touched on already, but one of some of the key things that we feel that we've really been able to achieve. One is bringing folks in from all around the world. I mean, we used to have a lot of complexity around just sharing files, whether it was in emails or SharePoint or what have you. All of them were problematic from a collaboration standpoint, and now we've got a single, in the cloud that anybody can look at with a web browser and see real time, and much easier to coordinate and collaborate across our worldwide offices. And also then, because of that, then you've got a single source of truth that everybody's looking at the same thing. Whereas before, again, oh, I did an email, I did a Excel file, I sent it to you, oh, but then I made some changes and I sent you a new version, but you didn't realize that because you didn't see the email, you're looking at an old version, or you were doing your own thing, and because we've got an 8-hour time lag, we weren't necessarily looking at the same thing. So again, trust in the single source of truth, just providing a lot more trust and ability to communicate across the world.
And I think that was one of the most unexpected benefits of really changing our processes and the platform on which we do our forecasting and planning, is that Anaplan became more than simply a platform for creating financial models. It became a platform for communication between finance and the business, and a way for them to have far greater visibility than they ever did before into their performance. And the final benefit that we really received out of it was speed. As an organization, we within finance became far more agile and able to respond to business needs in a way that we couldn't have even imagined a year earlier. And to illustrate that, at the beginning of our previous fiscal year, we had some changes in key executive positions, specifically our CEO and CFO. And although a couple months prior to that, we had gone through the process of creating an annual plan and setting out some forecasts based on that, when we had those leadership changes, there were new ideas that were brought into play about how they wanted to run the business and which things they wanted to focus on and what they had in mind for the company in the way of financial targets. And so we were able to respond to that with incredible speed and create, whole new models and whole new forecasts for them that incorporated those new ideas and those new philosophies on how they wanted to run the business. And that's something that we could have never done had we not, spent that year going through this, whole revamp of everything that we do within our forecasting and planning processes. With that, I will hand it back over to Steve to talk to you about the keys to better forecast.
If you want to look at Timely, and I'll use a ship analogy here, if we think of our organization as a ship, we have to think about what kind of ship it is, and particularly how we get everybody going the same direction. Now, if the captain of our ship is in an ocean tanker and he's got a telescope or a pair of binoculars, how safe is it for us to go at a high rate of speed with a full load? And most people agree it's not real safe because, you know, a mile out you might not need to do anything. 2 miles out you might need to change direction. 3 miles out you might need to stop. So most people would agree an ocean tanker pretty much needs radar to be able to see what's out there. And so think about that as you think about how far or how timely you need to be. It's really how fast you need to be able to see what's ahead of you in terms of stopping, changing direction, or altering things. Now, the flip side, I'll give you another analogy, again a boat analogy, but in this time, what happens if we're a motorboat? Most people agree that most motorboats don't need radar simply because they can turn quickly. They can turn on a dime. So when you think about your organization and what makes for a timely forecast, you really have to step back and ask the question, what kind of ship are we? Because you know, you really need to look at the forecast horizon being how long it will take you to adjust your existing plans, how long will it take for your organization to kick in and start new actions, how long would it take to launch major new initiatives, and those things all come together and combine to kind of give us what our forecast horizon is. And that horizon of timeliness is really what's critical that we need to be looking at in terms of what's happening. And you can solve the problem one of two ways. You can get a longer forecast, or you can become more nimble. And most organizations will solve it as a combination of the two. If I think about Serena earlier, when we have a lot of manual spreadsheets and a lot of distrust of data, you have a system that just doesn't allow you to respond very quickly. So you want to try to look further, but even that, because you're not quick in terms of how you handle it, becomes very, very difficult. The more nimble you become, the more faster you can analyze, the more quickly you can look at different alternatives, different scenarios. All of a sudden, timely becomes an important factor to improving your competitiveness as an organization. Let me pick back up and talk about our timeliness point, because in addition to thinking about timely for the organization as a whole, I want you to also think about what is timely in terms of individual items. This comes from our work with Southwest Airlines. If you take a look at it, I don't have to forecast everything every time. A lot of people get stuck in this financial accounting mode of we got to look at all the chart of account, we got to look at all this level of detail, we got to do everything every time. The reality is what you really ought to be doing is focusing your time and attention on what's really important to your organization. So think about your accounts. What's critical to your business and what's variable, what changes a lot. Things that are both very, very critical and change a lot, you need to look at a lot. If you look at Southwest Airlines or any airlines, the revenues and the fuel costs are probably the two most critical items. So when they look at their economic relevance, their variability, the speed of response in terms of how quickly they can adjust to whatever's happening there, that drives an update frequency of very, very frequent, and it requires a forecast horizon that they're looking at very, very intently. Those are the red items on your schedule. If you look and go the other extreme, the things that don't vary or don't change a lot, things like advertising spend and aircraft ownership costs, they have a lot of control over that. They pretty much can dictate what they want to do there, so it's very responsive to whatever they want to do. And so we don't really need to look at that on a quarterly basis or nearly as much because it just doesn't change that much. So we back off and only look at that once a year or once every 6 months. In between those two, the things that are very critical but don't very critical but don't change a lot, or the things that are very variable and they change a lot but they're not as critical, those things we look at on the intermediate scale. So think about it in terms of your income statement. Think about the key items and hone your attention to the things that really matter, because what we're really trying to deal with is a limited amount of management bandwidth. We want to focus that on the things that really, really matter. It's, as Covey said, the big rocks in terms of what we're trying to do. Next point I really want to talk about is really moving to the whole issue of actionable. In terms of the actionable point of view, we want to make sure that you put a forecast together. It focuses you on what action that you should take. In this situation, our tanker is headed for the rocks. It's going to crash. We need to take action to veer our course and move to safety, to move off to the dotted line you see to the upper left. So when we think about putting together our forecast model, I want you to think about building a model that's actionable. I've seen a lot of people build a model that looks like their income statement. And while it shows you that numbers change, it really doesn't tell anybody what to do. So when you think about it, build models that focus not just on the financial results, but focus on the operational things that drive those results. Now, you'll have three types of models: mathematical, statistical, and judgmental, and you'll use all three of those. But if you'll build kind of a driver-based approach to your model, it will tell you what are the physical things happening and begin to track that and contract that to what you understood was going to happen, and you can begin to see the deviation. And the model should be intuitive, so as you see these changes, it immediately begins to provide guidance to people as to what they should do to take corrective action, what alternatives could be considered in terms of what's moving forward. So think about building your models in such a way that they immediately give you actionable results. The next slide is really reliable, and that's the word we use instead of forecast accuracy. We want forecasts that are reliable, and that we simply mean free from bias. And we find that out by measuring it. In this situation, we had some targets for average net error and average gross error. And our target for net error says we should be less than 1%. We look at our measurement, we're 0.8. So yeah, we look good there, so it doesn't look biased. But we see a problem when we look below at average gross error. And in average gross error, we see that we're up over 14%. So we have to look at the data. And when we look at the data, the graph on the bottom half of the slide shows the data. And what that shows is basically we're 9 data points above the line, above the average before, and 5 data points below. Simple math, you don't need any more of a statistics degree than this, but if you have data points and you get 4 errors in a row above the line or below the line, 4 above or 4 below in a sequence, that's a sign that you've got bias in your system and you can no longer rely on it from a normal distribution. So just a simple measure, look to make sure you've got a random distribution above or below or both differences, and they're just normal variation. If you've got bias, you've got to get to the source. The most common source of bias is just simply people are basically been semantically schizophrenic into thinking things should happen a certain way. Paul Hensley, the CFO of Holt Caterpillar, told me, Steve, for 22 straight years, we always beat our forecasts, always beat our budgets, and the only thing I learned from that is we were really good at sandbagging. And if you're always beating a number, all you know is you're really good at sandbagging. You really don't know what you're capable of. And in today's world, we really need to know what our organizations are capable of. The fourth point we've talked about a lot, and that's really the point of alignment. And in alignment, we really were trying to get to not having these multiple different directions that everybody wants to go. We need really one set of forecast numbers, not a whole bunch of different views about where we want to go. So we want to move beyond that and have this one line of where we're headed. We can have points where we choose to turn and go left or right, but we need that one version of the truth to keep everybody aligned and everybody going together. Finally, the last point that's really, really important I want to make to everybody is we want to have a forecast that's cost effective. We want to do things in the right order, at the right speed, often in the same way. Eliminate the unnecessary movements and observe the results and improve the process. Get rid of the biases. If you look at what Serena Software did, by putting in a system, they dramatically shrunk the amount of effort and time it took to get information. And because of that, they could be much more responsive to the jobs changed. The work changed because now we're not spending all the time gathering up data, as most people in Excel spreadsheets are. We're not constantly trying to validate things. We can really begin to work and use our brains instead of just our hands and our eyes to check to see if we've got the right numbers. Instead, we can start thinking about what the numbers mean and what we can do instead. And it's a far more enjoyable process when you're actually engaged in actually thinking about what planning is really, really about. So keep in mind, we want to get started. We want to do it early and often. We want to eliminate the waste and drive forward with the key things in terms of what's out there. To quickly recap, what we want to forecast, the diamond level forecast, they're timely and time to take good action so you don't panic about hitting the rocks. We want forecasts that are actionable. We don't have to, when we get the forecast, it should begin to immediately tell us what we need to think about doing. It's to suggest actions and alternatives that we can jump into. We want reliable forecasts, simply free from bias. We don't want to be tainted up or down. There may be a normal variation, but we want to be free from bias. We want to make sure they're aligned. There's one version of the truth, not multiple things that we have to sort through. And finally, we want a forecast that's cost effective. We want to do it right the first time, no rework, no up and down, no back and forth, simply right the first time and where we can move forward and take action on it. So those are the keys that in terms of diamond level forecasting. Let me close. I think we may have one more poll before we wrap up, but let me just close my part out by talking about, really when we think about forecasting, a lot of people get the misconception that we're trying to perfectly predict the future. When Steve Morledge and I wrote the book on Future Ready, we thought about calling it Future Perfect for a while, but decided the product liability claims on that might be pretty high when people woke up after reading the book and their future wasn't perfect. Instead, we decided the best that we could hope for was really to be ready for it. If you think about what we're really trying to do in finances, we're trying to be ready, help our organization be ready for whatever happens. We don't know if the economy is going to go up or go down. We don't know what's going to happen with currency fluctuations. We don't know what's going to happen with the cost of key commodities. All big assumptions that drive our business. But if we have plans for it, if we know what we would do to reach and take advantage of opportunities or to put a shield up to defend against risk if it happened, if we have thought those things through and we knew what to do, we'd be okay. If you're sitting in a hurricane's coming through the Gulf and you're in Goshen, Mississippi, and you know it's coming at you, there's not a thing in the world you can do to stop it. But if you know how long it's going to take to get people packed up and moved east or west or inland or moved to safety, you're going to be in pretty good shape. And so that's what Future Ready is really about, is being able to understand it coming at you and knowing how long it can take to get to safety and knowing what to do. And if you're real smart, you'll have a plan to come in behind the hurricane and help clean it up and make a lot of money. And I like to also always end by just talking specifically about Erensto, since my colleague Steve Morley's got the hurricane for me. I want to always ask, did anybody really know where it went? Because this is where it was projected to go. The reality is when Erensto actually came blowing into the Gulf Coast, this is a different version of that same map. It didn't come to Goshen like they thought it was going to. Instead, it followed this yellow line straight up over the tip of Florida. So I use that to really remind you, is even when you're projected, sometimes you've got to be ready for the unexpected. So as hurricanes come through the Gulf Coast, if you're in Florida, you better be ready. And so when you think about what you can do and what you can do to make your organization ready, that's really what we're trying to get to, and these tools and techniques that Serena has so vividly illustrated.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Melissa. Steve, next question I will direct your way. What is the most common of the common symptoms of forecasting illness that you reviewed today that you see with companies where they have the most issues, the symptom?
The most common one, I think, is people just get buried in the detail. They really don't step back to think about what really drives the business, and so they just think it's just like performance metrics. We just think more is better, and so we try to forecast it more and more detail, more and more minutia, and it really doesn't help. Particularly back to kind of the response that Melissa gave, when you think about a line, you have different executives in the business that came from different experiences in the past, different schools of thought. And in many cases, they don't come together immediately aligned because they have different views about what really drives the business. So getting to alignment, everybody wants their own data out there. Everybody wants their own detail. And so they all ask for more and more stuff. And finance, trying to be a good provider, ends up kind of in the crosshairs of providing more and more data, instead of backing up and trying to think about what's the real drivers of this business and getting some agreement from the executives on what really drives the business. What are the big rocks we ought to be looking at? The nice thing about finance in today's world is that we don't have to be perfectly in terms of predicting what it is. We can have hypotheses. If sales thinks it's driven by this, if ops thinks it's driven by that, we can look at the data and run a hypothesis on each one of them and let the data begin to tell and show us. And so by honing in and building cause and effect diagrams, predictive logic diagrams we call them, we can help people hone in on what's really, really important. And because what you really want to be doing is spending more time focusing on the really critical stuff. And to do that, you got to stop doing dumb stuff and stop focusing on the stuff that's less critical to your business, or focus on it with a far less intensity or frequency than the stuff that's really, really critical.
Great. Thank you very much, Steve. Next question I'll direct to Nathan. So, Melissa, please feel free to add your commentary as well. Do you have any incentives in place for parties involved to offer accurate data and help drive the forecasting efficiency?
No, not on a forecast perspective. I would say no. Melissa, I can't think of anything that would, I mean, to me, if you did, you'd end up in one of the really nasty symptoms that Steve was describing around forecast accuracy. I think you'd basically be asking people to sandbag. So no, we don't do that.
Let me jump in there a little bit as well, because I think Nathan's exactly right. This is a situation where putting money on the table gets you a far worse result. You know, when we eliminate budgets, we don't want to tie budget achievement to reaching a financial number, because people will sandbag the number. We don't want to turn around and start incenting people to hit forecast numbers by paying them for forecast accuracy. We have to trust that people are trying to do the job, and if the forecast can be free from bias, if there's not a monetary payment, what we're really just trying to understand is what's out there. And we need to separate the things that are kind of environmental, like what's happening with commodities and currencies and general overall inflation trends and things like that, from the things that we can control. And even with the things we can control, we can look at the physical indicators of what's happening. So this is a situation where getting money out of the system gives you a far cleaner result and a far more, just eliminate the monetary incentive to bias it one way or the other. And our experience is you get a much cleaner, more accurate forecast. I remember our first Beyond Budgeting session we had back in 2002. We had the controller from Borealis over, and they basically had changed radically how they did rolling forecast. And basically, instead of having a whole bunch of people inputting and everybody biased, they gave it to the operations controller who was close to the operation, said, just tell us what you think. Just tell us what you think the run rate is. And I think if your forecast can be a run rate that just says, this is what's happening in the business, if nothing else changes, this is what's going to happen. And if you're short of the target, that sets up a useful conversation. If we're trying to improve 10% and we're only improving 4%, the forecast should say 4%. The fact that you want to get to 10 needs to have a set of conversations. Says, all right, what's going to change? Well, what process are we going to improve? What investment are we going to make? What's going to change in our underlying process to make that performance go up 6 more points to get to 10? And you can have a robust conversation about that, because each of those initiatives require capital, they require manpower, human capital. They may have a competitive response. If you try to raise prices, you have to think about what the competitors are going to do. So you get a much more robust conversation about what really has to happen to make that number go up than if you're trying to hit any kind of monetary incentive on it. Reward actual performance, not forecasting or budgeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Steve, in order to be mindful of our time, I'm going to have to go ahead and close our Q&A session. For those questions that we did not get answered here today, we'll coordinate with the speakers and get those questions answered for you. I would like to have a big thank you to today's speakers, Steve, Melissa, and Nathan, for their time and insights. They're clearly thought leaders and an excellent source of information on today's topics. Note in the post-webinar survey, which you'll be prompted to take right after the webinar concludes, you have the opportunity to express your interest in being connected with today's speakers with just a few mouse clicks. Also like to thank once again our today's sponsor, Anaplan, whose commitment to thought leadership helps us make this event possible today. And finally, a big thank you to the audience for your valuable time. We hope to see you again soon at another performative event or online at www.performative.com. Thank you very much, everybody. Make the rest of your day great.